The iPhone X has arrived, and with it, the first significant redesign of the iPhone in 3 years. There are a lot of changes here, but are those changes for the better? Or is this simply different for difference sake? It shouldn't come as a surprise that the iPhone X is the best iPhone you could buy. Period. It has the best design and it uses the best components and materials. But the new design means that there's a lot to get used to here. There are more traditional options this year if you're looking for a flagship phone, including the iPhone 8 Plus and a number of Android phones. But smartphone design's changing across the board, and you're gonna have to come along for the ride eventually. The question is now a good time to jump on board? The iPhone X has a really similar construction to the iPhone 8. Both phones are extremely well made, and they fit together with super tight tolerances. Both sandwich a thin slab of electronics and battery between 2 sheets of strengthened glass, and then join that glass with a band of metal. On the X, the aluminum band's replaced with stainless steel. Now, stainless steel is harder and less likely to scratch and dent, but it's also heavier than aluminum, as is glass. At 174 grams or 6.14 ounces, the iPhone X feels significantly denser than the regular iPhone 8, which only weighs 148 grams or 5.22 ounces. The glass on both sides of the X is chemically strengthened, but Apple won't say if they're using Gorilla Glass or their own product. Apple does say it's the strongest glass they've ever used on an iPhone. According to third-party drop tests, that's been an incredibly difficult claim to test. Some tests show that the iPhone X is actually extremely fragile, while others show it being dropped from head height repeatedly without a scratch. So it's not really possible to make a conclusion based on these tests. But unless you love danger, I'm going to recommend you put this phone in a case. Regardless of how strong the glass is, it's still glass. And Apple's charging $279 US or $359 Canadian to replace a broken screen, and an insane $549 US or $709 Canadian to replace the black glass, unless you have Apple Care. The back glass is easier to grip, which makes it easier to pull out of a pocket and less likely to slip out of your hands, but my advice is still to get a case. Apple introduced water resistance with the iPhone 8, and the iPhone X has the same IP67 dust and water resistance rating as that phone. That's not the highest rating, but it's more than enough so you can feel safe reading text in the rain or streaming video in the bathtub. The X comes in 2 capacities. The 64GB model costs $999 US or $1319 Canadian, and the 256GB model sells for $1,149 US or $1529 Canadian. You can choose from silver or space gray, and both colors look great. The glass gives them a depth and a reflective quality that's really attractive. The silver has a naked steel rim and it's less likely to show fingerprints. But the naked steel does seem to pick up scratches more easily. The space gray version, on the other hand, has a black vapor-coated rim, which hasn't shown any damage so far on the model I've got. Along the left side, you're going to find the mute switch and volume controls. Nothing's changed on the bottom, where you're going to find a lightning connector and a speaker. There's no headphone jack here, but we already knew that, didn't we? By the way, the iPhone X uses the earpiece as a second speaker for stereo sound. The speakers are really loud, but they do sound harsh when the volume's turned all the way up. They're actually a bit worse than the speakers on the iPhone 8, in my opinion. The right side of the phone is where things have really been switched up. The power button's been replaced by the side button, which has a bunch of functions. One press activates Siri, pressing the side button plus volume up takes a screenshot, and then the side button plus volume down lets you turn the phone off. The iPhone X has a 5.8-inch OLED display with a really high pixel density of 458 ppi, so everything is super sharp. Though the screen on the iPhone 8's only 5.5 inches, there's actually more usable space on that phone because of the iPhone X's taller and thinner display and the notch. The OLED screen supports HDR and Apple's True Tone technology. It's much warmer than previous iPhone displays, and it becomes even warmer than that when you turn on True Tone. True Tone uses light sensors to figure out the color of the ambient light in the room, and then it adjusts the color temperature of the screen to match. This was a nice feature when it was first introduced on the iPad, but True Tone's much more aggressive on the iPhone X. It makes whites appear yellow, almost as if night shift's been activated. I personally prefer something cooler, so I've turned True Tone off. A side effect of the warmer display is that it makes the blue shift that's typical of OLED displays much easier to notice and more distracting. When you view most OLED displays from an angle, the displays color shift and become more blue. That's been a problem for other phones like the Pixel 2 XL, and it's also an issue here. Did you think I was going to forget to talk about the notch? Along with the removal of Touch ID, that's probably the most controversial design decision Apple's made with the 10. So in order to fit all of the electronics they needed for their front-facing true-depth camera, Apple decided to cut a notch out of the top of the display. That area always appears black. Information such as the time, signal strength, and battery life are displayed to either side of the notch. The good news is that during everyday use, in portrait mode, you get used to the notch and you pretty much stop seeing it, but it's not all smooth sailing. The notch can really get in the way when watching full-screen video or playing games, and there's no ignoring it in those situations. Also, app developers have to update their apps one by one to work with the notch, and many apps haven't been updated yet. Apps that haven't been updated display large black software bezels that look a lot like what you'd find on older iPhones. The other big question mark's been the removal of Touch ID and how well Face ID will work as a replacement. There's no fingerprint sensor on this phone. Instead, Apple uses the TrueDepth camera to scan your face to unlock the phone. The system learns about your face as it changes, so glasses and facial hair aren't a problem, and it can also see clearly in the dark. If you have a twin or a sibling who looks a lot like you, Face ID can trip up, so you might still want to use a passcode in those circumstances. But for the rest of us, Face ID is just as secure as Touch ID. And in my experience, it's just as, if not even more, convenient. When Face ID works, which is most of the time, you don't even notice it's working. You just lift up your phone and slide up the notification shade to start using the phone. If Face ID does have trouble, it's often because you're holding the phone too close or too far away from your face. In that case, just reposition the phone and try again. It's no different than when Touch ID fails, when you come in an angle or your fingers are wet. It happens a bit more often, in my experience, but it's so trivial to retry. Face ID could have been a disaster for Apple. And they've done a good job here. And using Face ID to authorize payments or unlock your password manager feels a bit like magic. The TrueDepth camera also enables Animoji, a feature Apple's pushing heavily in its marketing. The phone can use the TrueDepth camera to track your facial features and then map those onto, admittedly very cute, avatars. I certainly don't think it's the phone's best feature, but it's a fun hook that works really well. With the removal of the home button, Apple's had to create new gestures to access common functions. For example, you swipe up from the bottom edge to access the home screen. To access the app switcher, you swipe up and hold, and then you scroll through recently opened apps. Swiping down from the right activates Control Center, and swiping down from the middle and left brings down Notification Center. It takes a while to learn the gestures and to perform them consistently and comfortably, but now that I can, I think they're pretty convenient. They feel natural and they feel fluid, and they make sense as part of a touch interface in the way that a physical home button never really could have. Apple has become very good at chip design, and that shows with the iPhone 10. Both the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10 use Apple's own A11 Bionic processor. Loading apps and switching between them are both very, very fast. In terms of raw benchmarks, the A11 Bionic does destroy the Snapdragon 835 that you're going to find in most Android flagship phones, but real-world performance is much more of a mixed bag. Third-party testing shows that load times are similar between the two processors, with the 835 faster in some cases. The iPhone 10 is also somewhat limited by its 3 GB of RAM, which means you're going to have to reload apps more often than with the Galaxy Note 8, for example, which has 6 GB of RAM. The iPhone 10 ships with a 2,716 mAh battery, which is slightly larger than the one in the 8 Plus. And it turns out that that's more than enough power. I routinely found that the 10 had 30% or more battery life left at the end of a long day, and that included apps, the web, streaming video, and playing games. If you're tired of fiddling with the Lightning connector, the glass back allows you to charge the phone wirelessly. Apple's adopted the Qi wireless charging standard, so you can use third-party chargers, because Apple's own to-be-released charging mat looks like it's going to be heavily overpriced. The iPhone 10 also officially supports quick charging, but frustratingly, Apple's chosen not to include a quick charging power adapter in the box. All you get is the regular, slow wall adapter that comes with all iPhones. To enable the fastest charging speeds, you're going to need to spend at least another $75 US for a USB-C power brick that's compatible with the power delivery standard, and a USB-C to Lightning cable. In contrast, many other manufacturers include quick charging accessories in the box with the phone. Apple's refusal to do the same feels cheap. The camera on the iPhone X is essentially the same camera you'll find on the iPhone 8. Both are 12 megapixel dual lens systems with one wide-angle lens and one telephoto lens. One of the only differences is that the 10 is the only iPhone with optical image stabilization for both lenses. As for image quality, Apple used to be the uncontested leader when it came to smartphone photography. Now though, the playing field's evened out, with some Android phones sporting cameras that are just as good as, or in the case of the Pixel 2 for example, even better than the iPhone. Still, the iPhone X takes sharp, detailed shots with accurate colors. Low-light shots contain a lot of detail, but I did find there was excessive noise compared to the Galaxy S8 for example. The camera does portrait mode, which can blur the background and add artificial lighting effects using both the rear and front-facing cameras, and that's perfect if you can't stop taking selfies. It doesn't seem Apple was able to cram in dual, optically stabilized lenses in an enclosure that sat flush with the rest of the phone. Instead, we get Apple's largest camera bump to date, which I think is just ugly, and which I haven't really gotten used to. It's the phone's only physical blemish, but it's a major one, and it's another reason to put this thing in a case, in my opinion. The iPhone X is a significant break from how the iPhones traditionally looked and functioned. Yes, other phones were first with features like Face Unlock and smaller bezels, but it feels like Apple has refined those features. For example, the same face detection technology used to unlock the phone also helps save battery by detecting when you're not paying attention to the phone and then dimming the screen. And hardware buttons aren't replaced with software equivalents, but with gestures instead, opening the door for powerful new ways to interact with and control your phone in the future. So, should you buy an iPhone X? Well, that depends. Do you want to jump on board and see where things are headed, or are you more comfortable sticking with what you know? If you'd rather stick with what's comfortable, you'll be more than happy with the iPhone 8, which is significantly cheaper and shares many features with the iPhone X. And if you're really turned off by what you see here, you might also consider the extremely strong competition from Android handsets, such as the Galaxy Note 8 and the Pixel 2 XL. I know I've been tempted. But if Android isn't your thing and you'd rather look forward than stay in your comfort zone, the iPhone X is the phone for you. Thanks for watching this review. It was a long one, but there was a lot to cover. If you have questions about something I didn't talk about in my review, let me know in the comments. Also, let me know what you think of the iPhone X. Are you planning on upgrading, or do you plan on upgrading to a different phone, and why? If you want to support the channel, please consider liking my videos, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Hi everybody! Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.